All right, I think I'm live now. I thought I was live. I almost got started there. I actually did get started for a second, but I forgot to hit the go live button. So if you can hear me, please let me know in the chat on the side here, just to get some confirmation. It looks like everything's good, but I would love to just get confirmation on that. And I know there's going to be a slight delay in my test. And I can actually just pull this up here just to confirm on my phone. Let's see. On that. All right, looks like it is working. Sweet, thank you, Larry. All right, so thank you all for being here today. The goal of today's live stream is to give you an overview of SK8CAD, more specifically the latest features that were added to SK8CAD, because I made some pretty big improvements lately or recently. I don't expect this to take more than like a half hour to 45 minutes to go over. Hopefully I can make it quick and efficient, and I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions at the end in case you have any questions about how any of this works. So if you're not familiar with SK8CAD, SK8CAD is skateboard and skateboard mold design software that allows you to design skateboards and mold right in the browser, and you can download 3D models, and you can get to SK8CAD by just going to skatecad.com, and this is the site. If you've been following SK8CAD for a bit, you might notice it looks a little different. Real quick, we have these tabs at the top here. Nothing's really new here. I updated the About with a little overview video recently. Put in some links for you to support the software if you'd like to contribute to its development. We have a user guide. This is where you'll find all the information we talk about today, or a reference for all the information you'll have today. I put a link to the forum, which is right now, that is the solution for if you have any questions. I would love for you to ask them on the forum, and what I'm trying to do with that is create a community of SK8CAD users that allows you to work together to get questions answered a lot more quickly than everyone going through me, because that isn't really sustainable in the long run. And that's pretty much it. So the first update is the example shapes. So I'm going to go over the minor updates first, and then we'll dive into the more complicated ones. So one piece of feedback I've gotten is people don't really know all the time where to begin or how to create the shape that they're looking for when just this popsicle board shows up. So I've created a sample of example shapes that allow you to see how specific types of boards might be made. So if we change it to Surfskate, it'll update the model automatically, and it'll update all the specs on the left-hand side here to produce the board and the molds that match the description of the type of board it is. And it does take a little minute to load on my computer. It might be going a little slower than normal because I have the live stream going. And here you see, this is a Surfskate, and if you wanted to reverse engineer that, or if you wanted to tweak this, you can go ahead and change the parameters, and you've got a nice, helpful starting point now. So just wanted to show you that first, because that's super helpful for going anywhere. And I also wanted to showcase like what you can kind of do that's kind of unique. So I have this like mountain board design on here, and some of these designs will highlight some features that maybe don't appear obvious that you can do with SK8CAD. So if you modify some of these parameters, you can get some pretty unique geometries still using the tool. Anyways, I'm going to pull back up the street deck because I think that's what I think that's what the majority of people are using, but I would be curious to know. I'm sure it's a mix of board designs because you could do short boards to long boards. Next thing is the file name. You could simply type in whatever you want here. This is helpful because if you're using SK8CAD, particularly in private mode or incognito mode, which is what I'm in right now for Firefox and in private mode. The reason I do that is because it helps me ensure that I'm getting the latest version of SK8CAD. I'm not using some cached version that's out of date. It doesn't allow you, when you download files, to change the file name. So if you were like, well, I want to name this something so I know what this is, I'll call it my street deck. And if I hit generate STL, download STL, you can see it'll download my street deck.stl. Same thing if you download the SVG template, my street deck.svg. Again, if you are new to SK8CAD, the SVG is the 2D profile of your board shape. That is a projected top view. And the STL is a 3D model of whatever you have shown in the viewer window here. So keep that in mind. All right. That's pretty much it for the simple updates. Another thing I'll just mention is I did update some of the algorithms recently to allow for better quality models. So you might notice the transition sections are a bit smoother than they've been in the past, the last time I did a live stream. All right, let's change this to the mail mold, because that's going to be, of all the 3D models that get generated, the mail mold is the one that gets generated the fastest. And I'm going to go over the first new feature of two major new features, which is tub concave. Concave is the curvature of your board in this direction. So you can see here, there's like a distinct crease, and that is new. You don't have to have that. If you uncheck tub concave, you will have radial concave, where the concave is a pure radius. So the mold just curves based on a radius of a circle. You check that box and you have a distinct flat section with curves and then a slanted section. So you can see there's a crease there. And the radial concave is still available, and you defined radial concave in the past with just one parameter, which is concave drop, based on the width of your deck and the amount you'd like your board to drop from the rail or the edge of your board to the center of the concave. I've got a board here that I'll quickly show you. Hopefully this is in frame. If you look at the drop from this edge to the center of the board, the vertical drop, that drop combined with the width of your deck would be enough to define a radial concave. With tub concave, there's a few new parameters that give you some additional customization. So the first is the flat concave width. That is this flat section here. And actually, I'm going to open up the user guide because I've got some better imagery here. All right, so these are some cross sections of example concaves. So you've got the radial on the right and the tub on the left. And let's look at this one on the bottom left here. This bottom left tub concave it has a distinct flat section. You can see there's a little bit of a curve, and then it's got a distinct slant. So this has a 2-inch flat width, which means that the distance or the length of this flat section, where it's truly flat, is 2 inches, and then the board is going to gradually curve away and then go down at an angle, and it's going to create that geometry to give you the drop. The other new parameter, other than the flat section, the flat concave width, is the tub radius. That is the radius of the curve of this crease. So you can see this bottom left one has a pretty distinct crease. I'm going to update it here so you can see. Let's make this a 3-inch tub radius. That means that the curve is going to be really tight, so it's going to have a crease and then it's going to slant down, and it still is going to make the depth of the concave what you set it, which is 0.4 right now. Now, if you don't want such a distinct crease, you can mellow out that curve without making the concave be mellower. So let's now change that to 12. And I should say that you can't just make this whatever you want. There is an upper limit. So you can see with 12, it almost looks radial. You can see maybe a very, very subtle point where it starts to curve and where it's flat. But aside from that, this is mellower. And you can see that here. Here's the 2-inch flat width with the 12-inch tub radius, and you can see it's flat and then it gradually curves down. It's almost more progressive at the edges of the board. Now you might be wondering, or before I get to that, I do want to show you or let you know that you can't just increase this infinitely, this tub radius, because it will reach a point where the radius is so big that it can't physically achieve the drop that you specify with a radius that you specify. So if I entered in a tub radius of 30, I'm going to get a little error. You can't even see it here, but if you see anything in this top left corner, it's not good, and I have to put in an error message. So I haven't done that yet, but basically there's an error generating the model, so don't do that and keep it low. The reason you might want a let me talk a little bit about the difference here between the performance of these. So radial concave is going to actually produce the most mellow feeling board compared to a tub concave with a small radius, even if the concave drop is the same. So to word that more clearly, let's say you set a 1/2-inch concave drop on a skateboard, one board, or on 2 boards actually. You have 2 boards with a 1/2-inch concave drop. One has radial concave and one has tub concave with a small tub radius. The tub concave board is actually going to feel steeper because the rate of change of the curvature is more pronounced. Whereas with radial, it's gradual throughout. So that leads to a whole bunch of other considerations. It's really up to the skater, whatever you prefer to skate. I wouldn't say one's right or wrong. Depends on if you like having a flat section or not. And obviously you can change the flat width, and the wider the flat width is, the more aggressive the concave will feel, because the more steep those like flares of the tub come down. So hopefully that makes sense. As for build considerations, I'm sure there's going to be a limit of how much of a crease or how small of a tub radius you can actually put into your board. That's going to vary depending on what you're making your board out of and how you're pressing your board. So keep that in mind. The steeper the bend, the harder it is most likely to bend the material you're bending. And I think that is it. The only other design tip around tub concave is keep in mind 2 things. One, this does not account for rounding over the rails of your board. So most of the time, after you cut out a skateboard, you take a trim router or you sand the edges of your cut edge so that they're rounded over. And I don't know if I have a great example here right now because all my boards that I have on hand are used, so they're all kind of squared off here. This one's not too bad, but the curve I'm referring to is this curve right here. This gets rounded over typically. It's not a sharp edge. What that means though is that your board will actually come out mellower if you do that, because this concave drop is based off the drop before you round over the edges. So maybe take off of like a 32nd of an inch to a 16th of an inch for that, to account for that in your design. So that's like 0.03 to 0.06 inches. And the other consideration is that you'll likely see a little bit of spring back. How much is tough to say because again it depends on your method and materials. But spring back is when you press the board and you take it out of the press, the wood's going to relax a little bit, and so there might be some mellowing out there. So again, maybe accommodate for another 0.03 to 0.06 inches for that as well. All right, that's it for tub concave. Let's move on to kick concave. So kick concave, there's a whole new section for kick concave. And concave in the kicks refers to concave through the kick tail and kick nose of the board. So you can see on the mold here, there's a curve right here. I'm gonna exaggerate that a little bit for you here. And the reason this was added in is it's actually pretty common on like standard popsicle boards. A lot of common boards have subtle curvature in the kicks. I've skated both flat kick boards and boards with concave in the kicks, and I haven't noticed a significant difference. You can feel a difference for sure. But in terms of performance, I haven't been able to not been able to do something. It's really more of a feel thing for me. I've heard that there might be opportunities to maybe get more leverage out of the board in your flicks if you've got a little bit more concave in the kicks. You might also retain more pop in the board for longer because you're maintaining just one point of contact with the ground the entire time as the board wears down and you get razor tail instead of it flattening out. So there's a couple reasons why you might want this. And the first thing to note here, if you're doing your designing, is to select the concave in the kicks box. So by selecting that box, that will enable all the parameters here. Otherwise, your kick will be flat. Next is the nose base drop. The nose base drop refers to, it's kind of like a concave drop, but at the point where the nose just starts to form. So if I look at the mold sideways here, you can see there is a bit of concave between the middle of the mold and the edge of the mold. So the drop refers to that vertical drop. And right now it's set to 1/8 of an inch. I do have a cap on here with the arrows. Of course, you can always bypass the caps. They're put more as a recommendation and a guide. If I put like 0.5 inches here, let me do that both. Oops. If I put like 0.5 inches here, you're gonna see what this does. Yeah, it basically eliminates that transition section and just kind of creates something that looks like that. Very spoony shape. Be aware that you may not actually be able to physically press this shape with maple veneers though, because it requires a lot of compression and stretching of the veneers. So just because you can make it in SK8CAD doesn't mean it'll work in real life. But basically that drop adds that in. What that can help with actually too is helping you achieve deeper concave because it reduces the amount that the board has to stretch in the transition sections. So when I say transition sections, I'm referring to this piece right here where the board goes from the base of the kick to full concave. So when you increase the nose base drop or tail base drop, you're reducing the stretch of this edge relative to the center here. So I think what's pretty common is, you know, anywhere between 1/16 of an inch to maybe 3/16 of an inch here. And I think that's the range I've defined in here. And keep in mind, this is based on your mold width. Unlike concave drop, this one is actually based on your nose width, your mold width, because it's a little bit easier to keep track of that way because the shape of your nose and tail can vary so much, particularly at that point. So remember that. Next is the additional nose angle. So your kick nose normally has an angle to it. The additional nose angle is how much steeper the nose is at the edge of your mold. So the kick nose angle right here, the 20 degrees, when you define that, that's defining the angle at the center line of your mold, so the angle right here. The additional angle is going to be how many extra degrees to add at the edge of your mold, which right now I have it at 2 to accentuate the curvature here. The greater this number, the steeper the concave is going to be at the kick. All right, so there's the nose. So you can see it, and there's limits to how much the wood will actually bend here. So like 4, that might be a little bit tough for wood to do. I don't know, I haven't tried it, but that looks pretty tough. And again, in the user guide, there's a whole section just on kick concave that highlights all the things I'm talking about right now. So I know this could be a little confusing, so take some time with it. Change one parameter at a time and see how it changes things. That tends to be helpful. Lastly is the additional nose radius. Just like the nose radius that's defined as 4 right here. That is the radius of curvature from where the board's flat to achieve the full kick angle. The bigger this number, the mellower the kick will feel. The smaller the number, the steeper the kick will feel. The additional radius is how much larger do you want it to be at the edge. Now you could of course set it to be 0 if you would like it to be the same at the edges. However, I've noticed when I was vacuum bagging boards with concave in the kicks, it seems like it wants, the wood wants to come together to a relatively flat point and then concave back out again. So let me pull up this image. So this right here is a side view of a kick. And you can see the original nose tail radius in red and the edge nose tail radius in purple, and you can see it's actually more gradual, and the kick right at this section gets, the concave on the kick is the smallest right at that section, and that's because based on what I've seen, it seems like that's most natural for what the wood wants to do. It wants to kind of flatten out there. Again, you have to kind of test this out. I haven't done enough testing with enough combinations to have a good way of knowing like what the limits are. So I don't know how much or when to specifically recommend this. Generally, if you're probably about have an 1/8 inch of drop across a fairly large mold, like a 10 inch to 12 inch wide mold, you're probably okay without adding any extra in. It may just be helpful to do that. So again, this is purely for, in my opinion, for helping the wood bend. There may be a benefit to skating, with it flatter there. I don't know. I haven't really noticed that, but that's just something to note. Of course, you can always hack things in SK8CAD and do things that maybe aren't intended to be done. So like, I guess you could put in a negative number and see what happens. I haven't done this, I don't think, yet, so this is going to be interesting to see what actually happens. And it may not work at all. All right, yeah, there you go. So there's the mold. Let's just leave that in because that's looking real weird right now. And get on to the next specs. I'm going to skip, obviously, there's all those same parameters for the tail. We have concave resolution. What this does is it alters the number of steps taken right here in this section. The actual main reason I have this in is because there are some issues with the meshing algorithm still that create some bugs, particularly on the female mold. Usually with the male mold we're okay, but with the female mold we get some issues. If you see an issue, let's see what happens. If you see an issue with your mold, the first two things to try to do to fix it is change the concave resolution, because most likely it's caused by that, or change the model resolution. So you can see that is clearly not good. So something is going wrong there. So if we change the concave, you kind of have to play around with it a little bit and see if you can find a value that works. Try this. All right, so I just changed it to 0. So you could see, I'm glad that that worked. You can see that simply changing the concave resolution, which changes nothing on the specs of your model, meaning that no matter what this value is, the mold will work equally good with its partner mold. It'll just fix any bugs in the algorithm, which I am working on improving. It's a continuous process trying to improve this and debug it. But for right now, that is one of the hacks for fixing it. Next, we can click on, let's say you're doing this and you're like, this is cool, but I have no idea what kind of geometry is getting created right now. I'm going to pull the male mold back up. And let's click on Show Contours. And Contour Resolution, I'm just going to leave that at medium for right now. What this is going to do is create like a candy cane image of your mold, which will show you the individual contour lines so you can see how the mold is curving. This does take a minute to do, to show up. You can see it actually is a little bit buggy there, I think because I have a weird value here. So I'm going to make that nose radius something maybe more typical that you might see. And this is super useful for visualizing concave because it is really tough to see what it's doing exactly without this. So you can see there's like a bit of concave here, it mellows out a bit here, and then it gradually gets deeper in concave as you move down the mold. Super helpful. If that's not enough resolution, you can change to ultrafine, you can do coarse. It'll basically just change the thickness of those candy cane lines. And when you are downloading your model, make sure Show Contours isn't selected because it actually is altering the model. It's not just a visual effect. So you might get some bugs if you download your model with Show Contours selected. The main design consideration as you're doing stuff with concave is really just making sure you don't have a bug in the model at this point. And for that, I recommend doing all of your design work with the female mold showing. It's going to take a little bit longer to generate than the male mold, but if there are any bugs, you'll find out about them right away with the female mold, because you don't want to go spend all this time developing your specs. It looks good with the male mold. You download the male mold files, and then you switch to the female mold and see there's a slight bug. That would just be annoying. The way to eliminate bugs is, and in the forum you could see a little thread on this, until the script is improved that runs the code. Simply changing a spec, one of these parameters, by even like 0.01 in value, whether that's inches or degrees, could sometimes be enough to get rid of the bug. So it's not like it's a massive change you have to make in order to make it work. It's just helpful to know that. And preferably, it's only a resolution thing that you have to change. So here's the thin, the ultra fine contour lines, so you can see in pretty good detail. Another way of doing this too would also be to download the model and then import it into a 3D printer slicer software and slice it, and that way you could actually see the print layers. Does the same exact thing. Just another way of doing it. All right, unselect that. And then other things, I think I kind of mentioned the build considerations for the concave. You can't make anything you want, unfortunately, because there's limits to how much wood can bend. So it may take some trial and error on your part. Also use the forums to share what you find or ask questions to see if anyone knows or has an idea of what may or may not work. It could be helpful to get some recommendations there. And the last thing I'll mention regarding the updates, I can't remember if this was in the last video, but I'm just going to quickly cover it now. Just going through here. I think this is new. I don't know if you were able to change the notch diameter before. So by default, they show up as a 1/2 inch diameter. That's because when I use a CNC router to cut molds, I use a 1/2 inch end mill or ball nose end mill. So this allows me to not have to do a tool change and mark my registration marks with one tool path. The model resolution has changed since the last video. Because the way the transition sections are generated has changed. So this will just smooth out this a bit more. Honestly, you don't really need to alter it unless you're like, you have something where the surface finish is really important, in which case you should probably just put a buffer layer anyways between the mold and the veneers or the material you're using, because this is plenty, the quality is plenty here with the default model resolution. It's also just another helpful thing for debugging. And then the print sections, what these do, let's just change the mold height. Like, let's say I'm 3D printing this and I want it to be as thin as possible. You can see there was a little error message that came up there. Some 3D printer slicers allow you to break up the model in the slicer itself. And you could also do that in SK8CAD if yours doesn't allow you. So set what your print section width is and your print section length is. This is going to divide up the model. So the width, this should be about your bed width or a little bit less. What this is going to do is, if the print section width is less wide than your mold, it's going to break the mold in half, like this. So you only get half of mold, because my mold is 9.5 inches. So it won't fit if my print bed was only 9.5. So it splits it in half. If I had a 10-inch print bed, what the software will do is actually give you the full model here. Another helpful thing is to add in mold bore holes. What this is helpful for is adding in threaded inserts that are heat set, which you can do with a soldering iron. So if you watch the most recent YouTube video I put up yesterday, you'll see that. And also in my previous How to 3D Print Skateboard Molds video, I cover that as well. I get into the details of how to install the threaded inserts, or I think I give a link to them and show you the process on that and how I attach everything to a backing board. Anyways, and then you choose the section to download. It's broken into a bunch of different sections. For longboard, you'll need to use the extended nose or extended tail section, or if your print section length is really short, you'll need to use those. That's just basically, but if your mold isn't too short, like the nose ended on that nose, there's nothing here. It just creates an error. So that is that. Anyways, that's the brief summary of everything. As far as development goals go, I think some of the next things we're looking at doing is adding in the ability to make progressive kicks, which instead of being kicks that are formed with a radius and a straight angle, they'd actually be driven by a Bezier curve where it's progressively steeper. It's not a radius, which is very round. It's actually like, it looks like a regular kick, but there's just a subtle curve in it the entire way up. So that's something we're planning on adding in. The ability to save, and there's a whole other list at the Patreon page. If you would like to support this work and you want to see these improvements get made, you can support it on Patreon. You'll see there's a little prompt the whole time to take you to the Patreon page to help us keep this project going. What the support does is, for as little as just $5 a month, you can basically contribute and help power this and enable me to make the improvements to the tool, do the maintenance, update the code, all that kind of stuff, because all that does take a lot of time. So any support you're able to provide is greatly appreciated, and I hope to keep this available for free so that anyone can use it. You can, of course, hack the code. If you click on the upper right here, all the code is right here if you're familiar with OpenJSCAD. And if you want to contribute to the code, I don't have it on GitHub currently, but I could definitely get it up there if you want to make some contributions. It is pretty messy, but I do need to clean it up before I do that. And last button that was added was you can order it. Of course, you can order it through the open source board's website, which is my website where we make the stuff. But of course, you definitely don't have to. You've got the download STL button and you've got the download SVG button, so you can do all this yourself. All right, covered everything in under 45 minutes, so I wanted to open up the chat for any questions. So does anyone have any questions? And you can see on the right-hand side, there should be a little chat window here. And if not, that's gonna conclude this little session. Trying to think if there's any other things I can think of while I wait to see if there's any more questions. I did recently add in the ability to have both modes shown, and you could actually see it with the amount of offset you have set. So, oh, I forgot to change the mold height, but there's the both molds being shown. As you increase the offset, it'll increase the distance between the molds. Which, if you want to grab any screenshots for any like visual displays of your project or your work, you can. It's a fun way to kind of show the curves and show the mold. All right, well, I think that is going to be it. Doesn't look like there's any questions here. So thank you again so much for joining in. Thank you so much To those of you who support the project on Patreon, it's tremendously helpful, and it is what is able to make all this work. So thank you for that, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. See you guys later.